just great. So this is what we call a working group meeting. For the last several years, we transformed the working group to become more of a longer form educational type meeting where we can explain things a little more in depth and stay on one subject, and then have a extended time for questions. On this particular working group, we're really looking for, once you hear what we're doing, public comment. And so we're going to have some reminders how to make a public comment to us. And we really want to go out of our way to make that available for everyone that's on these meetings and people that listen to it afterwards. One thing about working groups is on some of them, more people or a similar number of people have listened to them afterwards as do on the day of, unlike our other meetings. This is very different because of the educational aspect of it. So with that introduction, I want to get started on this particular one. And we probably could go right to the slideshow, and I'm going to introduce the subject, but most of this will be done by the consultant and by Shane Dyer in particular. So before, I'd like to get the slideshow up, Shane, and then you can take over the screen, and then we can start walking through the slideshow. And what I would like to say is, as we go through these slides, there's about 40 of them. And as we do that, I think that what we should do, what I'd like you to do is, if you have a clarifying question during the talk, please ask that question. But we will have a lot of time at the end for comments. And sometimes if you think that you might get this answered a little bit later, you might want to hold off on your question, because sometimes what happens is people ask a question, it's like 2 slides down. They're thinking right, but it's like they kind of jump the gun a bit. So, if you really don't, if you're having trouble understanding something, please ask a clarifying question. You can put your hand up for that in the chat, and we'll have we will have Marty take care of that, let us know, and then we'll ask the question and get it answered. So with that, let's go ahead and start on this slide deck and get into this talk, which is the Truckee River Rock-McCarran Reach project update. Next slide, please. So the speakers are myself for a few minutes, and then mostly Shane Dyer, who is a PE with JUB Engineers. He's a principal in charge, a project manager. Me, I'm old and I have lots of letters after my name at this point in my career. The meeting purpose is an educational seminar, as I talked about. And so let's go on to the next 2 slides down. Next slide, 2. I mean, we could talk about what we'll cover in the meeting. Go back one. Okay, so we'll talk first about the introduction and project need. I'll cover that. Then we'll talk about the key progress from the alternatives analysis to the 30% design, where they've really honed down on exactly what they want to do in that inner river corridor, what we call the meander belt of the river. Well, actually, what a geomorphologist would call a meander belt. And then also the hydraulic design advancements that are being done, and the summary and next steps, and then, of course, questions, input, and feedback. Next slide. So what is this all about? The Rock-McCarran Project, REACH project, is a part of a larger, approximately $300 million project from First Cost that is a flood mitigation project of the lower Truckee River that we now call the Truckee Meadows Flood Project. It has been previously called other things like the Living River Plan. It's been called the local rate plan, the locally preferred plan. So there's been a lot of names for this over the years, and this has taken a long time to kind of get it to this stage where we're actually doing serious design work and actually starting to do groundbreaking and things like that on aspects of this project. but it's Rock-McCarran is one of seven major parts of this project. Here is a picture of Rock-McCarran, and you can see it in the middle here. That's from the Rock Bridge down to the McCarran Bridge. That's how it's named. Immediately upstream is the airport reach, and that's a project in and of itself. And upstream of that, there is the Tumwa project on the north bank, the GSR project on the south bank, and then just upstream of that, further upstream, there is what we call the risk levees and floodwall project, and that is the part of the upper part. And then there's two projects downstream. One is we call the North Bank levee, and then immediately downstream of that we have Vista Narrows terracing. So all of these projects are for flood control primarily. However, they all have, and especially Rock-McCarran and Vista, a significant channel restoration component, and Rock-McCarran has a significant recreational component as well. All of them have recreational components because of the trails around the river, but this one in particular has more recreational components than the others. So that is what the Rock-McCarran project is in a nutshell. Out of the 300 million, when you talk about the cost of all this property acquisition and the cost of the project itself, this one project takes up about a third of the budget. So it is the major project of all of them. There are seven, but this one takes up a third of the budget. So why is this needed? And we'll have some slides later, but it's because there's $2.5 billion of damage if a major flood like the 1997 flood occurred again. And that was from a UNR study in 2018, in 2018 dollars, which it would be more today. So what we're trying to do is put up flood levees, terracing, and other features so that these areas like north of the river where you see all those buildings in those industrial areas, and you see the airport tarmac to the south and another industrial area to the south, those areas don't flood, and damage to those buildings and the interiors of those buildings and the contents, loss of jobs and everything else is literally billions of dollars of losses. So we're trying to prevent that by creating a flood protection system, a flood mitigation system that can withstand the 1997 flood and then a little bit more than that even. So the goals of this project, along with uh, the greater flood project, the flood project of the Truckee Meadows flood project, are flood management, ecosystem restoration, and recreation. In this case of the Rock-McCarran project, that's in a future design and it's actually being worked on right now. But today we're really going to focus in on the flood management and ecosystem aspects of this project. Next slide, please. So the benefits of it, of the actual Rock-McCarran part of this project, is there is a river realignment to put it in a more natural state. It is right now a very constrained river, trained river. It has incised banks. You can see riprap in the picture that's being shown there in the foreground on the lower right side. So this is a very trained river. You want to let it have more ability to move around a bit in its meander belt. We're also putting up levees on each side to protect these industrial areas in the airport. We're putting up terracing to create a more natural floodplain, low terraces and high terraces. And we're trying to increase flood storage and capacity near the river, but we're going to end the flood storage in the industrial areas. So water doesn't go into an industrial area, get all polluted, come back in the river and go down to our desert terminal lake and affect that lake, which is Pyramid Lake. So we're trying to do all these types of things in this project. The environmental restoration is it does reduce by all the things that we're doing, by allowing the river to spread out more, by managing the high velocities and everything else, we can reduce bank erosion, add secondary channels, which create more fish habitat, construct pools and riffles that develops more diversity in fish habitat. And along the river, we reconnect the river to the floodplain, which affects vegetation, affects the vegetative expression, wildlife habitat, and those sorts of things. Plus, it preserves the existing riparian vegetation the way we're doing it. There's been a lot of thought into maintaining these existing places where we have natural old growth, if you will, uh, cottonwoods. It doesn't take very long to become an old growth cottonwood. They're a short-lived tree, but the point is we don't want to lose the things that we have that are good around here, but we do want to improve the overall situation. And then also establish new wetlands. And then in addition to that, there will be enhanced recreational opportunities both along the river or in this corridor. There'll be trails, there'll be enhanced habitat that will look more like a natural habitat and would be a more natural habitat with more fish habitat and wildlife habitat. But in the outer areas, there is an opportunity for either passive or active recreation. Passive meaning like maybe a picnic area with a trailhead. A more active would be ball fields. There's room, for anywhere from 5 to 15 ball fields, like for soccer or other sports similar to soccer that have similar field requirements. So with that, these are the benefits. This is an introduction to the project. And now what I want to do is hand it over to Shane so he can explain to you where we're at in the process in this 30% design, some of the things that they took from the alternatives analysis, all the comments that we received. We received about 40 different comments, at least 40, there were more. And we took all of those very seriously. There were lots of recommendations. He has a team working on this of a roughly 35 people, geomorphologists, engineers, biologists, and so on, recreation experts, and planners, etc. So we'll take that from here and let him move with that. And you can just take it over from here, Shane.
Great. Thanks, George, for that introduction. So we really started with the alternatives analysis, which was pretty critical because there's so many different ways to try and fix this. We weren't sure which way to go. So we did this alternatives analysis where we did really heavy in-depth studies, with these outside bubbles, the flood hydraulics, we did environmental, geotechnical, geomorphology. We looked lightly at the recreation because there is something we're looking at, although it's lagging a little bit behind because we're working on getting the flood first. The flood worked out first, and then the recreation will come. And then, some additional considerations like costs and private property. So it really just represents a significant amount of work with a lot of different teams, lots of different model runs on the hydraulic model, a lot of information that we pulled out of it. And we presented 8 alternatives in the alternative study, and all of them were successful alternatives. And we ranked those, and then we got input from the technical advisory committee, that's the TRFMA technical advisory committee, and we also had a public meeting. And from the alternatives analysis, essentially the recommendation, there were a few that scored the highest, right? But the recommendation was not one single alternative. The recommendation out of the alternatives analysis was take the best from a few of these alternatives and do another iteration. And so that's what we did here. These are the exact recommendations from the document. It's to improve the preferred alternatives main channel alignment through here, get it further away from the north levee. Consider reducing radii. We're going to talk about these later, but there was some really sharp bends in here that we took out. Further optimize riparian zones. You'll see that we really got some great optimization through some of these regions, additional optimizations. And consider using soils down here on future recreation area, and then collaborate further on the recreation design. So these were the recommendations. And then we popped out with, this is really that alternative that we're going to go into really deeply today, right here. And so just to kind of touch on what George talked about, why are we making the change? Well, the green here is what floods without the project, and the blue is what happens with the project. So that's a pretty telling slide, right? We're talking about billions of dollars of damage without the project. So why are we moving the river? You know, the current river configuration is, the health of it is very poor. It's incised, it has all those man-made constraints, just like George was talking about. Here's an interesting image of the historical, this is from the 30s, and you can see, you know, overbank, flooding, connection of the river with the overbank and flood zone. We overlaid some of it here to kind of see like what did it look like and what does it look like now. And, you know, from the very start of the flood project, there was a goal from the working group and the flood project community coalition that we were going to restore this natural system. And in order to restore the natural system, we have to look at the river holistically. And really, in regards to the flood management, the ecosystem, and then recreation opportunities. So just a couple of these things to just kind of describe them. So this is an incised channel, right? So when it floods, it's right in here. When it's flowing, there's no connection to the overbank. And this is the area we're talking about when we say overbank connection. And then the lack of habitat and biodiversity. We had extensive studies on the river that went through all the different riffle pools and runs and chutes, and there's a lack of habitat the way that it's been confined. And you can see here's a picture of the river in this section. You just have like this, you know, random concrete wall and big rocks just confining the river, so there's no connection for the riparian zone or terracing. This is another slide that just kind of really puts it into perspective. Everything in red, pretty much every cut bank on the river is artificially held in place by man-made elements. So you see, and that's how it's being held in place, you know, very unnatural state. Another big consideration that's been a challenge is the space constraints. So the existing river alignment, you can kind of see it there, it's behind there, and then the property and the property line, and then you see the buildings right there too. And in order for us to have a FEMA compliant levee, it's wide, like 50 feet wide. And so like right here, we can't actually fit one in unless we're doing like a flood wall. And one of the directives is also, hey, let's avoid flood walls at all costs, because it separates the community from the river. It puts the river behind a big wall. You can't get to it. And so space constraints has been really difficult dealing with getting the levees out of the private property and out of the buildings, existing buildings. There's a lot of interesting challenges with regard to the geomorphology. This is the slope of the river from Verdi going down past the lower river, McCarran Ranch. And you'll see there's a slope change right here with the Truckee Meadows. And this is this is a zoomed in view, and this is the actual reach itself. And you've got steep to a less steep reach. And we threw this in there. We wanted to kind of show there's a lot that we're taking into consideration as we look at engineering with the natural river process instead of engineering against the river process. You know, creating that meander belt width where the river can live inside and spread out that river flow, minimize the man-made treatments, and preserve, you know, we're trying to preserve the cottonwood galleries, enhance the in-river shading, and use alternatives to like riprap and concrete. One last consideration slide here, really that cost consideration and efficient design. We're really working hard on efficient design, and you'll see that as we go through the design here, working on how are we going to operate and maintain this thing, trying to reduce the potential maintenance costs, and with really pointed design methods, and then balancing on-site materials, avoiding flood walls, not just because they're costly, because they are very costly, but because they separate the community from the river. All right, so here we go. This is the modified preferred alternative. And we're going to kind of go through these step by step and kind of point out some of the main features here. So we start at the top. This is the rock bridge, and we come in here, and this is the old river channel. And we're utilizing the old river channel as an overflow, a secondary overflow in this overbank here. And we're going to have an engineered hard weir here that would let flows in here at about the 2-year interval. And then we've got over here, we lowered these are improvements from the previous design too. So these are things that we've done that improved it over here. We lowered this, we put in a potential wetland depression. We're able to make a little more room for some of the trees. So the cottonwood gallery, if you can see my mouse, this is all existing cottonwoods that we're preserving. And we're preserving a lot of the cottonwoods. The way that this is designed, it really does preserve those. And then let's see, we're using some large woody material over here. We're going to propose that for some mitigation measures over there. And then over here, we lowered the floodplain. We got another secondary flow path that is frequently inundated. And we also, there's a little bench right here that we added. This protects, it's further protection on this cottonwood gallery so that we don't undercut as the river comes and makes that turn. So we added that bench right in there. So this was a pond feature in most of the other in the other alternatives, and we turned this into an actual through river feature, and it has kind of a dedicated channel over here that will be great for habitat, and it'll be shaded with the existing cottonwood gallery. And this will also promote a lot of growth in here as it will stay largely inundated. We shifted this alignment, as I had indicated earlier. It came further up and posed a greater threat to this levee. So we shifted it down to be a little bit further away from that levee and make that work. We also shifted this terrace flow path over here to the side of the river. It was originally kind of right here, and there was a high avulsion potential. So we raised the ground right in here, and then we're taking the river out the side to reduce potential for avulsion. So 6, we included a secondary channel after the bend and before the riffle, and we're going to have large woody material here to reduce the potential of losing the channel or channel capture and provide additional habitat. We raised this right in here to help us maintain the river alignment. And it'll also be great habitat right in there. And then 8, we've got an engineered overflow again, similar, where we're utilizing that existing river. And this is kind of some of that efficient design. Like we've got these backwater channels on the existing river. We're using the existing river as it'll still be flow path. It'll still be overbank flow. And this is scheduled to activate around the 2-year interval currently in the design. So 9, this was another secondary channel overflow. We are again using some large woody material. And then we've got, and this is all habitat. And that's when we were talking about a lot of that habitat improvement. You know, we've got a lot of habitat improvement through the middle of the river. And then 10, we smoothed this out and really improved the way that the water is moving into and through the bridge by trying to get it turned sooner. So again, this is the conceptual iteration after all the optimization from all the alternatives. So we're going to run through how they inundate, and this gets really interesting and fun to look at. So we're going to look at the whole smattering of the return intervals, and then the conceptual design of the hydraulic berm and some of the things that we did with some of the materials there. So here we start with the 200 CFS. Now this is like our very low flow situation, late summer, usually doesn't get much below the 200 CFS mark. And you can see that most of our channels are still activated in that 200 CFS. We still have decent backwater for habitat and rearing potential. So that's our 200. Then we switch to the 350. Now 350 is your average low flow. So this is what it's going to look like most of the time. If on the period of record for the flows, this gives us that average low flow of 350 CFS. This is what it's going to look like. Usually when you go down the river is going to look something like this. It's going to have great backwater. It's going to have these side channels coming out with a lot of wetted areas for different vegetation and habitat. And it's going to look, you know, really natural and just really beautiful. Honestly, it's going to be great. This is the 2-year inundation map. So here we're really starting to activate some of these side channels and higher terracing. Now we get into the 5-year, and this is kind of bank to bank on our meander belt almost. We're getting pretty full here. I guess not totally full, but you can see that we're getting a lot more water in here. Channels are filling up. Terraces are well filled. 10-year, very similar. 20-year, starting to see it deeper. 50-year, here's where we really get edge to edge. And you can see this is our berm. This is our interior berm that we're going to talk about how we've been trying to design this. 75-year. So as of right now, we've been able to get a 75-year level of protection with a relatively small berm here. And then 100-year, we're inundated into this outer storage area, and we're really starting to cut off the peak of the hydrograph, you know, that we're cutting off the top of that flow, reducing a little bit of that flow at the very top peak, highest flow in the river. And then this is the 117, which is the worst condition there. So I'm going to talk about this berm and what we're doing. This is currently in process, and we're doing some iterations on it. Really, we were shooting for a flow containment range of the 50 to 75-year flow, and we tested a lot of different notch weir locations along this berm to kind of see what happens and how does the flow equalize, and where are the hot spots in terms of velocities, and creating that low maintenance design where there's not a lot of hot spots and there's not a lot of riprap or concrete required. Currently, the best results were 2 notches. There's one right up here in the high, you know, in the upstream end, and kind of one right down near the middle. And previously we had shown models with just the 1 notch, and we couldn't contain the 75-year. And with just a little bit of optimization and a strategic movement of the notches, we're able to get it to do the 75-year without really changes. So pretty cool optimization there. So we're really focusing on how does it overtop, and I'm going to show you some slides on that. And the crest is also going to be intended to be used as a multi-use path. So here's a video, and you can see the water coming in. This is on the riverside over here. Water's coming up to the top of the berm. Okay, the weir activated and it's filling up to take the peak off. And then you'll see right there, you get that point at which the flow equalizes and essentially flows towards, out of the recreation towards the riverside, is what we really were focusing on getting, so that we're getting debris flows and things not flowing in and staying in the potential recreation area. We're getting it so it's flowing out. Let me just show that one more time. So it comes up, they equalize, and that's the height of the berm. You know, that's really setting the height of the berm. And it's very iterative to get this, because the whole thing is sloped, right? So we're trying to have it equalize and fill in with the different weirs, and then spill out away from the recreation area and into the river. Let me show you another representation of. So here you see this, right? Like this down over here is the recreation area. Here's the berm feature. And this is functioning properly in that we've equalized the flow in the recreation area. And right as it equalized, it starts flowing out of the recreation area, and that area is already full. So we have water not cascading down a berm, but flowing into existing water. So we don't have to armor in the same way. And you'll look at the velocities. This is part of that complex design where you look over here, the majority of this is down at 2 and 3 feet per second. I mean, we're talking very low. We've got some greens in there, which is up to 4. And until we get near the bridge, where we get some 6s in the yellows, and then higher as we have to get through that bridge, But this is where you see, okay, where are the hot spots? Where might riprap be required, or some kind of man-made revetment that will protect against erosion? And for the most part, not a lot required during this 117 year. And that takes a lot of iterations to figure out and to make work. All right, I'm going to walk you through some cross sections that help to visualize what's going on. So starting up here on the north, this is that north levee over here. And then we come down into this secondary channel. This is essentially the existing Truckee River. And then this is the preservation of the existing cottonwood gallery here, main channel, the new river right in there. And then terracing, this whole thing is terracing that will be overbank for riparian. And then this is that internal berm, just a small berm that protects. This is actually the notch area. So this is going through the notch where we're letting water in. So that protects up to the 75 year. Here's the storage area slash potential recreation area. Of course, we're using it as storage to cut the peak off the top of the storm. And then the south levee. And then here's one through the middle section. We've got the north levee here. This is that backwater channel slash existing Truckee River, preserved cottonwood galleries. And then we go into some terracing here. This is that channel, low flow channel, terracing. Then we've got the main channel here. This is the internal berm right there. And then recreation area and our storage area and south levee. And then one more at the bottom. So this one's a little more complex. You'll see the north levee, existing Truckee River, preserved cottonwood gallery, and then you've got that secondary back water channel there, and then you've got some more terracing here, main channel here, more terracing, and then internal berm, and then storage area, and this is the deepest part of the levee here. And you can actually see in this one, we did some grading, we added some soils. I think we have a slide on that. Yeah, right here. So we did some earthwork and site balancing as recommended in the alternatives analysis, where we used like a 20% waste factor on the excavated soils, assuming that we could only use so much in the project on the levees. And then we had an extra 83,000 cubic yards of extra material, and we put it into the recreation area and graded in. You can see it a little better on this slide. The grading's rough right now, right? It's conceptual, but this is the concept. And we'll be able to work with these interior areas. Right now, it's kind of existing LIDAR, existing ground, but we'll be able to work with that and optimize those as well. We improved the drainage with this. We can improve the drainage with the interior changes. The other thing just to point out here is we actually have been running it with this kind of worst case scenario access points. They're preliminary access points that we can change, and we probably will change, but we made these big bump outs so that we're going to make it better, not worse. And that way we can say, okay, the hydraulics are great. We even made it work with a little bit, kind of a big bump out, and we did 2 of them for 2 access points for potential flow or whatever's going to happen. So that's kind of the placeholder right now in the design for access as we dial in the hydraulics moving forward. All right, so alternatives, this is just kind of the summary. So the alternatives analysis is done. We completed it. And then the next step, we're starting the 30% design. And the first kind of step is to take what was given in the alternatives analysis and get this preferred concept that you just saw, that we just walked through, and get some comments on it, get it in front of TRFMA, make sure it's right where we want it. We're probably going to dial it a little bit, right? From people's comments, what's going to happen, we're going to dial it, and then we're taking it to the 30% design. And then after 30, we'll go 60, and then, final construction. I think George kind of alluded to the fact that in the recreation right now, the current work that's going on there is there's 2 conceptual designs that are going on. One's kind of like a eco park / passive approach nature park. We haven't named that yet. It's the passive one, small. And the other was like a sports complex, which is the active approach regional facility. That's like a big, facility. And that's, that's not really part of this current presentation, but there'll be more coming on that in the future as those conceptual designs come out and are presented to TRFMA. That's it. I burned through that, huh? So now I think we take comments and questions. Looks like we got a hand up by Eric Young. Go ahead, Eric.
Thank you so much, Shane. That was so worthwhile. And just thanks for giving us the opportunity to see what you're up to. So many of us are curious, and it looks so incredibly comprehensively thought out, which of course is necessary. I'm um, I'm really looking forward to whatever it ends up being. But despite all of the important engineering work that you have to do and that has to be done right now, I'm really curious if Reno or the flood group has a requirement for public art in this facility, and if there's going to be any kind of a public art component conceptualized at some point for what's happening here. But thanks for all your work. This is just it's just so professional, and I know it's going to be really well done, and I'm looking forward to it. So thank you.
Awesome. That's a George question.
Yeah, I think that's something, Eric, that you should put down, like that email, right? That TRFMA at washoecounty.gov. Like, you should really consider some opportunities for artwork as we get into the park design, especially. We are definitely talking about signage and being very creative with the signage to educate people about what's going on in these areas. We've already talked about that. Looking at, when you get into that inner channel area, what's going on here? What does this do? What kind of habitat? And you can do that very plainly, or you can do that creatively with art. So I think that I would rather do the latter, obviously. But anyways, that's something that I think you should send as a comment. I mean, you already said something here, but I'd really appreciate an email on that.
Happy to do it. Thank you for your answer.
Looks like Valerie Anderson has her hand up.
Hi, I'm really glad to hear about all of your efforts in preserving the cottonwoods and, preserving the natural environment around the river there. I really like that design. And I'm also excited to hear about the possibility of an eco park with a passive approach to the design, preserving more of the wildlife and the natural feeling for the area. We don't really have that many places around here that are not busy or, full of noise. And I think it would be nice to, pursue that aspect too.
I can we actually asked after there were some 40 comments, and out of the 40 comments, a good 35 of them was, hey, be really careful here because you're in a very sensitive area. You have bats, you have different forms of birds and wildlife. We are in the inner area, definitely protective, but also we need to be careful as we come outside that burn to the south and make sure that we're not overdeveloping that. So right now we're doing in an alternative, looking at a passive approach and then an active approach, and looking at the differences in them, because there were strong comments on both sides. I mean, some people really want to maximize the ball fields and things like maybe we could have an amphitheater down by the river. I mean, all the way to, back off, So
Yeah.
we're trying to balance that, look at that, and come up with a solution on that. So we appreciate your comments, Valerie, as well as other Eric's comments or other people's comments. like I said, we really want to hear your comments about what's going on with this. This is why we decide to do the working group this way, is just to show you exactly what we're up to so you can have more informed comments. So
I really appreciate you, inviting us to your meetings and sharing all this with us. And one comment I have about the sports fields is, they were talking about the ones at Pembroke, costing about $23 million to actually, make happen. So where would they get the money for the sports fields? There, off of Mill.
yeah, there, I'm not really at liberty to talk about how
Okay.
they try to fund
Okay.
Pembroke. I mean, there's been a lot of discussions in the community, obviously, but I mean, here it's part of our project, but we'd also be looking for other sources of funding to try to help us build those fields, if we go that way, because it is a significant cost. And we are going to have, either way, we're going to have to actually take out a loan or a bond to build this project in a timely manner. And that's been talked about all the way back from 2005. And we even had a needs committee that talked about bonding and, a special levy. And I'm not talking about that, a special tax, not a tax, but a special levy on people that are benefiting from it. That's off the table these days. But we will have to finance this. And so when we're financing money and we're having to pay interest, we really want to minimize that as much as possible.
Yes. Thank you.
Let's see, W. Mantle.
Hi, thanks for taking my question and thank you for the presentation. Uh, what options have been considered elder-wise for this property for, say, revenue offset? Because I was thinking during this discussion that it could be a lovely wedding venue. And if that was something you guys could design in place and then rent out, that becomes a revenue offset to help pay down any kind of, financing that could occur. Just curious if those are ideas that have been coming in from like the Chamber of Commerce or anything to you guys.
I have not heard that idea yet, for the construction. However, on the existing property, we've had the wedding idea, especially down in the corner there by the McCarran Bridge on the south bank. We've heard that idea floated to us numerous times. People for profit, or even in one case, a 5013C, talking about trying to set up a wedding venue in that corner, especially because of the optics, especially once we cleaned out some of the garbage and stuff that we had over an issue. Right now, it's very clean. And but yeah, that's something that's been talked about, but not with the construction. I haven't had that comment yet.
For the comment, I guess, yeah, Kathy S. And we'll be noting these comments, and they'll go into the record. So there'll be a comment that says that. And in addition, the park designers are actually on the call, the people who are working on that, and they heard that, so they'll take those kinds of things into consideration. But ultimately, it'll be TRFMA making those kinds of decisions, and we'll design whatever they tell us to from my perspective. So, Kathy.
Hi, I wanted to echo Valerie's comments and just say thank you for holding this meeting. The habitat restoration effort and the preservation of the cottonwoods is that's such good news, because we have so little of it left along the river. I did wonder, when you're thinking about recreational activities for that area, do you look at the other areas too? So you're looking at the river as a whole, like the whole section that that you have, like, and way out, are there better areas to put ball fields and better areas to maintain as habitat Like, do you look at that more comprehensively than just this section?
TRFMA really doesn't have the ability to do that as just on the flood project. We're focused on our flood project. However, the people on our board, which are county commissioners and city council people, they definitely do look at that. They think about, well, we could do something over here at Pembroke. We could do something over here in these other areas that I don't want to list them all.
Mhm.
And why not just do it over there and not over here? So they are thinking that way, and that will influence things, I'm sure. But that is, from our perspective, we're just trying to remember it's not even my decision. It's the
Mhm.
board's decision, and all I'm trying to do is inform the board and let them know that there are pros and cons to putting a sports complex like thing close to the river. There's pros and cons. But on the other hand, yeah, if there's other areas for that has to be weighed. And I think they're the ones that are going to weigh it, not me.
Well, thanks so much. And I just would really love to see that area preserved. We really don't have a lot of areas of natural habitat right along the river. And I just think this is a really critical area for deer and raccoons and, all the things you mentioned. So I appreciate the work that you guys are putting into this, and we'll continue to be involved. Appreciate the invitation.
Thank you.
Thanks for your comment.
I think we have Ellen and Eric Young, or Ellen, I think is first.
Hi, chiming in again, thank you. Um, I think all these comments and interest in the ultimate use and how it gets used is kind of a way of showing confidence that the flood control aspects are kind of assumed that you guys all kind of just assume that you're going to nail that aspect of it, and we aren't really questioning, how that will work or if it'll work. So, part of this great interest in how it's ultimately going to be used is really reflective of the confidence we have in the ultimate way it's going to be engineered. So I want to say that, but then I'm also just another curiosity. Has anybody asked you to consider how this impacts those bats that live under the McCarran Bridge? That just seems to always come up. So many people know about those bats. And I'm curious if you've been approached about that, or if anything you're doing has to reflect that they periodically live there.
I think we've had close to a dozen comments on that.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. Okay, thanks.
And it is something they're looking at. They're planning on, they've done some census work on the south side of the bridge. Because one of the things is we have downstream, we have a bridge, a footbridge, and it's not well connected to um, the south side. Like, in order to get to our property right now, what homeless people would do, they would walk across that bridge, walk way up, and then cross McCarran, almost get themselves killed, and that kind of thing. We've got to probably have some way of going under the bridge to protect people from doing that. But we're talking about what time of the year to do that, how to do that very carefully, all the mitigation techniques that you'd have to use. So we're like looking at that like a small path there. There already is a small path on the north side as well. And the bats seem to tolerate it, but we need a lot more information on that. And we are seeking that information. Shane can elaborate on that, but yeah, that's something we've thought about.
Well, on the periodic times when the RGJ or somebody decides to run a fun little article on, hey, the bats, it will become a kind of a pop-up tourist thing. And you'll suddenly have a bunch of people wanting to visit to watch them every evening for a little while. It's not all summer long every night, but if it gets a little bit of attention, suddenly there's a whole lot of people that want to come down and watch them. And it strikes me that this is an opportunity for people to have a better place to watch them than they currently do.
Yeah, not only that, there's local elementary schools that are doing field trips to see the bats. And so we're taking it very seriously. And we have our environmental group is starting to study that. And we're reaching out to Nevada Department of Wildlife and they are a state preserved species. So that's a great comment, and we're working on that, and we know about it. So thank you.
That's so interesting. It's just another example of how comprehensive this project is.
Yeah. Ellen?
Actually, it's not Ellen, it's Roger Jacobson. Hi, George. Hi, Shane.
Hey, hello.
So a couple things. I have of course, obviously, as you guys know, I have a background in hydrology, etc. I was a little bit wondering about a few things. Again, a lot of work has gone into this, Shane. I really see a lot of the modeling looks really interesting. What I'm still a little bit concerned about is I'm still looking for a little bit more of the hard data on why it's so critical to move the river as far as you move it. The problem right now, of course, is, as you know, there's a huge extra cost, probably about $10 million on the project to move the river. And that's, of course, taxpayer dollars that we've all paid into. You're going to need lots of extra permits. And from what I saw in the ranking, it really didn't improve the fish habitat. The riparian zones, of course, are really interesting. It's good to keep the cottonwoods there, but we all know that if you put in an awful lot of willows, which was also part of the plan, you've basically built a great area for homeless camps, which I think we all really would like to avoid at all cost. I was also hoping that if and when you decide to move the river, you wouldn't move it quite so much. Right now, you've taken almost half of the park and made it looks like fairly difficult for public use, no matter what people would like to do. And I certainly would like to keep stuff along the river as a nice zone for people with the cottonwoods, etc. I think that's really important to keep it there. But it's, on the other hand, what you've done by moving it as much as you have is really impacted some of the best areas for ball fields. The nice level areas on Ferrari Ranch have been basically taken out of the formula. The other concern I have, and a lot of geomorphologists, I talked to a couple of them, they were also in the same boat. Under really, really high flow conditions, nobody that I know will guarantee that the channel will stay where you put it. It could certainly move back into another orientation, and it might not look anything like you've designed. And that, of course, is a big concern. After spending all that money, the channel would go back. I mean, the channel, I think the current channel has been there for almost 100 years. I realize it's all wrapped up and held together, but it's been there for a long time, and the cottonwoods seem to like it that way. As far as public comment, the thing that I had talked to some of the sports groups, I mean, I can literally get you hundreds of letters that say we need an awful lot more ball fields for our youth. Right now, as you guys have all heard, we're probably 50 ball fields short, and this is a chance to get, if you saved a little bit more space, you could get probably 20 ball fields in rather than maybe 10. So that's some of my concerns. I'll send you guys some more comments also. And again, thank you for all the effort on this and letting the public make comments.
Yeah, just on a couple of things on the money. It's really premature to say that it's $10 million one way or the other, because there is a bunch of land that we would have to deal with. There's a bunch of easements or purchasing of land. There are actual buildings that are in the way if you keep the river where it is, because the levee has to be very high. So then the spread on that thing, it's going to have about a 15 to 20 foot top. Then it's going to have a 3-to-1 slope down on each side. And when you do that, it can be 50 to 75 feet wide. And then you also have a little clearance area for seepage. I mean, it is a hard thing to do. And we found that when we were doing some design work on Vista Narrows, when we initially were doing some of the levee work there and flood wall work. And so flood walls also cost about double a levee on the Vista Narrows project. I mean, we have the data on that. We have from Vista Narrows. So we know that the cost would not be a savings of $10 million. In fact, it might actually be more. Any proposal that we do would have to deal with terracing, extensive terracing, even with the river in place, because we are adding 8,000 CFS to the water flow. The existing river runs out into the airport, runs out into the industrial area. 8,000 CFS goes out there and floods everything. That 8,000 now goes down the river corridor. So we have to design for a bigger river in that area. So these are some considerations that the team had to take into consideration in doing all that scoring and all those different things. Is it, is the alternatives analysis absolutely perfect? No. But did they consider a lot of alternatives that weren't even the top 8? Yes, they did over 200 runs and had, dozens of alternatives that they were looking at initially. Some just didn't make it to even be the top 8. And so there was a lot of things done there by a lot of people, and we hired the best geomorphologists that we possibly could for this sort of work. And yes, a river can move, rivers can avulse, but what we do is we look at the models and we look at the velocities and we look at the shear stresses, and we were very careful to have treatments that would be stable. And so that you have to do that sort of thing when you're designing. Yes, there's always going to be some question, but you don't say, well, I'll go to the river where it is alternative, because the river can avulse out of where the river is as well, especially when you're adding 8,000 CFS to the flow. So those are all considerations. I think I want to hear your comments and everything, but there's a lot to this that goes into this, and there's a lot of information that isn't even being presented yet. So I would say that there is a lot of evidence and a lot of data and all those kind of things as well. So just to push back a bit, but I do appreciate your comments.
Thanks. Let's see. I don't think we've heard from Gordon Gossage yet.
Great. Yes. First of all, let me really congratulate you, George. I think we first talked about this, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years ago, which is very exciting. Yeah, my company is Regenesis Reno, so we're certainly interested in regenerating the area. Now, the $100 million figure, that does not include buying some of the buildings and, I don't know, a bunch of different things, but do those add up to less than 10 million? I mean, you think the whole project would be like 110 million, or could be a lot more than 100 million?
Those buildings on the north side, those are actually very they're not condemned. They're very valuable buildings. I
Yeah,
mean,
no, I'm familiar. Yeah. Okay, so
yeah. No, the
that's
north side
substantial.
buildings are. There are some of it that's not. Some of it is like a forklift thing, and another part of it's um, a like a pick and pull type thing.
Yeah,
But
no, I'm
parts of
familiar.
it are
Yeah,
very.
George, I don't want to use up other people's time because it's 1 minute up. So yeah, the answer is 100 million doesn't cover everything, but some of those things can be estimated. So again, thank you very much, and we'll talk another time. Thank you very much. And I think William Mantle wants to say something or ask.
Thanks, Gordon.
Sorry, thanks, Gordon. I have 2 questions here. One, I'm curious what the ball fields or what these fields would look like if they were just passively maintained and not turned into ball fields or recreational fields of some sort. Can you give me an idea on that? And then I'll ask my second question if you want.
Shane, do you want to take that one?
Well, I mean, if we're talking about what would happen, I think the passive recreation, we've talked about some, nature trails and maybe a small picnic area and a small parking area, and then the land would, be, rewilded, I think is the term that people use, and we would let it go back to its natural state. And there would be some trails and maybe some interpretive signage and like some, paths through the river, along the river walk. It would be something along those lines, would be that passive approach. And the filled area would be, upland shrub.
There are Well, there are examples of that, like Dorchester is one possible example, although it's not fully implemented. There are some examples in our the downstream restoration sites that, like McCarran Ranch, some of the upper terraces have that. And then some of the other sites that we cooperated on, such as 108 Ranch and Mustang, have some upper sites, upper terraces that kind of look like that are just reverted back to a high terrace uh, grow area. That's what it would probably look like. But you know, that needs to be looked at more. Um, and I'm not saying do that. What we're doing is trying to give alternatives so people can look at this and make decisions.
Thank you. I can look at those areas. My second question is the Talus Valley development / Daybreak development has finally started kicking off in the since this year, I think, um, on the South Meadows and Veterans intersection. And I was never clear on how they were going to um, change the retention in that area because we had the 2017 flooding that occurred down Wilbur May, Veterans, South Meadows area. And I was curious whether their efforts for modified retention for their flood risk because of their floodplain would in any way impact the design or the building decisions that you guys are making.
Not on Rock-McCarran,
Okay.
and I know Reno has looked at that extensively with consultants for them. They've even had us. They've used our more advanced modeling to try to get a better grip on that at the direction of a court order and Reno. So, I mean, that's way beyond what we want to
Eh,
talk about today, but yeah,
sure.
it wouldn't affect that because we're somewhat upstream of that.
Okay.
That's more down by Steamboat, where Steamboat comes in. It could affect possibly Vista Narrows, but I don't think so.
I appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? We're questions or comments. I like the comments. I like being stretched and challenged on this. You know, I will push back on some comments, but that doesn't mean I'm not listening and wanting to kind of think through those things and the considerations. So please, you know, not there's no dumb comment here. We want your feedback as much as possible so that we can the bats were not things we were super considering until all those comments came in. So it's important to do that for us. An example, we were working on a bridge down in Wadsworth, and somebody said, "Hey, all the school children use that bridge. You better do it in the summer, you know, when the school's not in session." So that's what we're going to do on Wadsworth Bridge. We are telling the contractor to do it in the summer based on comments. So we really do covet your comments. Hey, yeah, that's awesome. Happy birthday, Marty.
Thank you.
That's right. This was on your birthday. Yeah,
Thank you very much.
yeah. She's 24 years old. No, I'm kidding.
33,
Yeah, there you go. 23.
which is when hobbits are officially considered adults according to Lord of the Rings.
Okay. Any other comments? Seriously, I want to make sure we're capturing comments here. Okay, well, if that's it, I think we've had a good hour, little over an hour on this. And like I said, we actually scheduled 2 hours in case there were a lot of comments. So, okay, one more. Here we go.
So I'll do one more because you seem desperate for comments.
No, I'm not
No, I know,
desperate,
I'm
but I'm
kidding. I'm joking.
desirous.
I'm joking. I'm joking. Um, uh, we've had a reduction in overall within Washoe for our wetlands, and so the restoration is exciting. We've had reductions in our insects, migratory insects and whatnot, all across the board. Are you guys working with biologists to carve out any specific breeding or mating zones that would actually be kept safe or like protected for some of these species that may or may not be endangered? Because during the construction process, you could carve that out easier probably than after the fact. Just curious about that.
I'll leave that one for Shane.
Yeah, it's a great question. We have a biological team, a whole group that's working on the biological habitat and improvements for both the fish, the aquatic species, and the, other species, the upland species, the riparian habitat for, the different species that are in there, and the bats as well. So we do have a whole team working on it and collaborating with like the geomorphologist team and the hydraulics team, and kind of everybody getting together talking about like where these habitat areas are going to be, what they need to look like, how do we improve them, how do we optimize them. So great question, and yeah, we are looking into it heavily, and it's guiding the design. So the design principles, the guiding design principles that TRFMA gave us that were outlined in this presentation are: number one, the flood hydraulics, right? We're saving everyone from the flood, $2+ billion. And then the next is environmental. So we're fixing the environment, and we're really focusing on making it a sustainable river system. And then the third directive in this order is the recreation piece.
Thank you so much.
You bet.
Well, we don't have any more comments. I'm happy to move on with my day, and I appreciate everybody that tuned in. And like I said, if you have any more questions or comments, can you, what's the email again? It's
TRFMA at Washoe County. I can share it again. TRFMA at washowcounty.gov.
It's in the chat too.
okay. Yeah, you put that in the chat. So anyways, thank you all for coming. And I just want to thank everyone, and thank you, Shane, for great presentation.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everybody.